Can we skip to the good part? Hi, I'm JoNeil Conley, and I'm going to tell you about my life. And we'll eventually get to the good part. But I want to introduce myself to you. Today, I'm coming clean about my life. So if you're familiar with the story of Job, Job was a good guy, had all kinds of stuff, got tested by the devil, maintained his faith, had a nice life afterwards. Well, that's kind of what I'm going to tell you about. All I ever really wanted to do was grow up, get married, have babies, bake cookies, and live happily ever after. Some of that's come true, and some of it wasn't. The happily ever after is true, but some of the journey to get there was a bit dicing. I grew up near basic Midwest mom, dad, and the kids household. My mother could have been Marion Cunningham or June Cleaver or all of that. She was a stay-at-home mom until I was in the ninth grade. Would you believe she went to work at the high school as the attendance director when I was in the ninth grade? I could never skip like all my friends. And all was well. It was a nice, wonderful upbringing. Two sisters, one brother. But some of the things that ended up in my psyche caused me pain. First off, people go, JoNeil, Neil, your parents must have wanted a boy. I heard that from several teachers. And it turns out I was named after my uncle Neil, who was a Flint City police officer, killed in the line of duty a couple years before I was born. So in essence, it was an honor to carry his name. And I struggled with that all my life. Oh my God, did they really want me? Did they want a boy? Think about that, little things that get said. And I had weird feelings when my name was mentioned and all. And I came to this place where I realized it was my mom's brother who had died. So of course she's going to have emotions and all that kind of stuff. And as an empath, I just sucked them right out. Let's hear it for the empaths on the call. The other thing about me is I was chubby in my youth. Now, if you look at pictures of me now, I wasn't chubby, but in the 1960s, when I was coming, I would have been, however old, a chubby, fat female couldn't get a good suitor. I'm sure that was the underlying message. But at one point, my dad said to my mother, she's fat, get her into ballet classes. Now, that was another thing that was innocently said with good intention that my poor little 6-year-old heart heard and took. I'm not okay. I'm fat. I need to go to ballet lessons. What's wrong with me? All the things. All of which led to maybe at age 10 being taken to the diet doctor, little box of pills. I still remember it. OMG. And at age 12, I was taken to Weight Watchers. Now, I say taken, but I want to, in retrospect, it was out of love and kindness. But it kind of warped my brain to where when I was a teenager, late teenagers, early 20s, I, in fact, had an eating disorder. And I now have disordered eating even as today. But I became a bulimic, where you eat and throw up, eat and throw up, eat and throw up. Had to get lots of crowns on my teeth because of that. Again, innocent things that my psyche absorbed and led me to who I am today. So I decided I was going to be a nurse. I got to remember, in the early to mid 70s, the choices were nurse, teacher, clerical support. That was sort of where we were at. And my older sister had taken the teacher job. So I was a nurse. Now I kind of was led to that. I think I had all the right stuff, and I do have all the right stuff. So I entered my nursing program. Now, going back to the weight disorder, I had to, and at that time I was like 165-ish weight. I had to lose weight to get into nursing school. I had to present myself to the school nurse once a week and be weighed. Traumas, all those kind of things. So I had a great nursing career. I still am active in the profession. That's the last half of this story. But I started my nursing career in the emergency. I went right from graduation to the emergency room. They always said, oh, graduate nurses need to go to med surg. Well, I didn't. I went to the ER and I loved it. It was exciting. It was adrenaline, all the things. And I stayed there until I told a patient to get his effing butt up on the effing stretcher, and there was nothing in his effing head. This was all before HCAP scores. But I had started to see the world through that lens. Now, I also knew as a nurse that the empath part of me, you stub your toe, I'm going to feel it, which is why the ER worked. So my next clinical rotation, quote unquote, was to the operating room. The patients are asleep. But it really was good for me. It was changed every day. I learned a lot of technology. I had all the stuff. And it was also in the operating room that I was bullied for the first time. I was in the operating room, not a brand new nurse. I'd been 5 years, but you have to rotate through all kinds of services. So I'd gone through my rotation and I was in the next to the last, which was cardiovascular, and had done really well to the point where my preceptor was scrubbed and I was circulating. Now, halfway through the case, we were doing an aortic aneurysm. I'm talking big ass surgery back in the day. You're wide open. And my preceptor sent me out of the room to find a retractor blade. And I was, okay. And I'm looking through carts and I'm calling central processing and I'm doing all this stuff. And I was out of the room over 12 minutes. Aside, the longer the patient's on the OR table, the greater the morbidity and mortality. So I come back to the room. Now, the chief of vascular surgery was scrubbed in. My preceptor was there. I looked at him with this sweat pouring down me going, I can't find it. And with God as my witness, she turned very great to the doctor, tapped his hand and said, she's new. She doesn't know what she's doing. So there I stood at the foot of the table going, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. Get the case done, get the case done, which I did. And at the end of the case, the head of central processing says to me, JoNeil, she knew that retractor blade was out for repair. Say what? She not only embarrassed me in front of the chief of surgery, she put this patient at risk. And that was my first moment where I said, I got to figure out a way to stop this. And when I fast forward to about 10 years ago, I studied bullying in the operating room. We'll get to that in just a second. So along with, in the interim here, I married someone I went to high school with. Now, I want you to keep in mind that both of my sisters are happily married to their high school sweethearts, one 52 years, one 48 years, all of the things, grew up in a small town, the whole 9 yards. So I married someone I went to high school with. I call him my starter husband. Things looked good from the outside, but very early on in the marriage, I was emotionally abused. I was taunted and teased and all the things. And these empath, these wounds, all of the things came to full play. My starter husband ended up what's the word I want to use? Committing. My ex-husband committed bank fraud and ended up was convicted. I think he pled. I'm not 100% sure. It was a long time ago, but he ended up going to a federal prison. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. That's the end of this whole story. And even in the midst of all of this emotional abuse that was going on, because I was a superstar in my job. I was like, yay. And he went the first time, was gone 8 months, got released in November, and I got breast cancer in January. Lymph nodes involved, the whole 9 yards. That was 34 years ago. I'm alive, yay. But the next 10 years were a rocky time with this individual who is now gone to heaven, or gone to heaven, I'm hoping. But within the 10 years, I had an 8-year-old niece die of Rett syndrome. My grandma died, bankruptcies, just a bunch of stuff. And I stayed in that marriage. And in my head, my starter husband had convinced me I was fat, I was stupid, I was ugly. I only had one boob, and no one would ever love me. Well, there came a point where I had done all I could do. I'd gone to therapy. I'd done all the things. I knew in my heart this wasn't healthy for me or our 9-year-old daughter at the time. So I was headed to a convention where I was going to be installed as the state leader. And it had been a tumultuous time leading up to that. I remember I was packing the car, and he was screaming at me from the porch. And he said, "If you leave, don't bother coming home." And I went. And I left that marriage with my 9-year-old daughter and one suitcase full of sequins formals. Anybody who's in the Masonic fraternity understands the whole sequins formal things. But I then had to rebuild my life. Therapy, coaching, a whole bunch of stuff, getting a doctoral degree. Dr. JoNeil Smith. The whole 9 yards brought me to a place where I liked myself again. And many of you are on that same journey. Life, going back to that story of Job, a lot of that stuff takes its toll on us. So I had, in those 17 years, gotten to a place where I was pretty comfortable. I'd worked in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. I did training, gotten my doctoral degree, all the things. And one fateful day, I was sitting in Reagan Airport, gate 18, and I looked up to someone who I knew but didn't really know, made eye contact, had a conversation, exchanged phone numbers, all the things. I got on the plane. I was in first class. He was in steerage. He got in the back and was sending me a text message. "Do you want to have a cocktail afterwards?" Well, I was leaving the Detroit and flying to Flint. So I got off that plane and I skedaddled to my next gate. Little did I know, till years later, that he had stood at the gangway waiting for me to come off the plane. Well, to make a long story short, that is now my dearly beloved husband, who he chased me until I caught him. And we're having a great ride. You know, talk about skipping to the good part. We now have a grandbaby that he gets to enjoy. And I say, I had to raise her mom as a single mother, and you get to skip to the good part. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell. There's all kinds of depth into all those topics I was referring to, but I'm glad to meet you. I hope you're glad to meet me.